We're here with UCLA social scientists Darnell Hunt and Ana-Christina Ramon to talk about the Bunche Center's 2015 Hollywood Diversity Report, Flipping the Script. So let's begin with the highlights of the report.
Well, I think the biggest finding was that a lot of what we found in 2014 has been reconfirmed. I mean, we're finding that television shows that reflect American diversity and films that reflect American diversity do better at the box office, the TV shows better in terms of ratings. That was an important finding. At the same time, we're finding a large number of cases where there's underrepresentation behind the camera still and in front of the camera. So there is this disconnect between what sells and what Hollywood is doing in terms of business practices.
We've also found, regardless of race, because we looked at demographics of the audience, and we found that all races really want to see diversity on the screen.
Across the board, what holds up is that the films are in the sweet spot in terms of diversity. TV shows that are in that sweet spot in terms of diversity, about 30 to 40% diverse, do the best.
Why is it so difficult to get the industry to shift its practices in terms of diverse job opportunities, diverse content, etc.?
Yeah, Hollywood is like this huge, battleship in the middle of the ocean. It's hard to turn it around. It's a high-risk industry. People want to surround themselves with those with whom they feel comfortable. 9 times out of 10, that's someone who looks like them, another white male. The feeling is, from their perspective, that gives me the best chance of being successful with my project. So I think you have this conflict. You have a conflict of interest, really, in a way, between what makes sense from the individual level and what makes sense from the institutional level. From the institutional level, of course, it makes sense to reflect the market. But that's not always a rational choice for individuals.
So tell us what's changed this year.
In 2013, you had 12 Years a Slave, you had Fruitvale Station, you had The Butler, you had a number of films that were directed by African Americans and starred African Americans. So minorities, because of African Americans, made a little progress in terms of leads, directors, writers, that type of thing. But again, it remains to be seen whether this is just a one-time deal because of these films or whether we're going to go back to business as usual. I mean, years ago, of course, Halle Berry and Denzel Washington won for Best Actor in the same year. It wasn't like that was the beginning of a trend, so we'll have to see.
You mentioned 12 Years a Slave. That brings up the Oscars. Last year, 12 Years a Slave, of course, won for Best Picture. This year, Ava DuVernay famously snubbed for Selma. And we had the second Mexican director in a row to win the Best Director Oscar. What impact might all of this have on the industry going forward?
Well, I mean, hopefully, folks in the industry will begin to see that people with diverse experiences and viewpoints are viable as talent to run these major films. Unfortunately, in both cases, those Mexican directors were men, because what we see among directors is that women are the most underrepresented group. I mean, which is one of the reasons why it was just so disheartening that Ava DuVernay wasn't even nominated, because you don't typically have women directing films that often. Our data show about 5% of the time. And to have one direct a film that's nominated for Best Film and the woman director not be nominated is a huge missed opportunity. Not only a woman, but a woman of color, which is even rarer. So, that was troubling, but at the same time, somewhat reflective of the Academy, which is, 90-something% white, 70-something% male, and average age 63.
And also, I think another difference is that those directors are Mexican, of Mexican origin, and so they actually grew up in Mexico, so they didn't grow up in the U.S., and so it's a different international perspective of those directors and the way that they got into the business, into Hollywood.
So what will it take for there to be a shift in the culture that's sustainable as opposed to just a momentary blip?
Yeah, well, I mean, it really will take interventions on every front. And this is a point we make in the report. I mean, there's no magic bullet. It's not like, well, if only the studios will do this. It really is going to involve the studios, the networks and TV, obviously, the academies, because of, the way they bestow recognition on certain types of projects. Their membership needs to be overhauled. The talent agencies, they need to overhaul their rosters and their agents in terms of diversity. There's enough blame to go around, and I think that on every level, stakeholders in the industry are going to have to figure out ways to get involved and be part of the solution as opposed to part of the problem.
While our research is definitely 100% independent, we want to work with the industry to effect change. So we don't want to just be sitting in our ivory tower and releasing these reports. We want to be able to work and consult and discuss our findings with the industry executives and find ways that they can actually then change.
We don't want them to see diversity as a burden or a moral obligation. We want them to see it as a business imperative. And we want to have the data necessary to show the linkages between diversity and the bottom line. And I think that's what the study is doing. I think it is changing the conversation. I mean, everywhere we go now, people are saying, oh yes, I read your study, I heard about it, and I'm looking forward to the next installment. And that's I think the impact that we're trying to create.